Yo, Ian, what's up? It's Josh. No, Alan? No, not the football. We used to work together. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. I got an idea for you. I got to pitch you. So, dynamic flight is super cool, right? What if we had dynamic walking? Yeah. So, like when you're just walking around, like in cities or whatever, you're like, yeah, you're like pushing buttons to like make your legs move. And what's a quap? Hello? Ian? Hello? What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Sounds Good Makes Sense, a discussion show for the World of Warcraft player. My name is Devilor, and today I want to talk about why I'm not playing Dragonflight yet. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about my experience as a returning player to Dragonflight, and what about that has made me want to spend my time elsewhere for now, and what my plans are for when I do inevitably return to Dragonflight, or retail, modern, whatever you want to call it. So real quick recap, if you don't remember from one of my earlier videos where I was talking about this, my Dragonflight experience was pretty much just launch. I leveled up to 70 on my monk, did a couple of things at max level, and then basically stepped away from the game for a while. And that wasn't really like anything to do with the game itself. I've talked about this before, but I guess just to go over it again real quick, it wasn't really anything about the game itself. It was just, it still felt like work to me in a sense. And I just needed some time to get away from the game so that I could come back to it from the fresh perspective of a player instead of thinking about it as someone that used to work at the company. Now, obviously, I left Blizzard well before Dragonflight came out. I left in March. It came out in November of 2022. So I didn't really have any knowledge of what any of the content coming after launch was. I just kind of leveled to max, went, yep, this is still World of Warcraft. I need to take a break for a bit, and stepped away for a while. And since that time, a lot of things have been added to Dragonflight, and I haven't really done any of it. And then once I, kind of got the itch again and I was ready to return to World of Warcraft as a player, I poked at it a little bit. I did do a little bit of content. This would have been prior to 10.2 releasing. Did a little bit of stuff in there, but didn't really dig into it too much. I mostly just ran a few Mythic Plus groups with friends. So then what is it that is causing me to stay away from Dragonflight and spend my WoW time elsewhere right now? And I know there's a really obvious answer here, which is Season of Discovery. As you know from this channel, I've been spending a ton of time on Season of Discovery. And so that's the obvious, straightforward answer. And probably the biggest one is genuinely, I've just been more focused on SOD for the time being. But I do think there's more to it than that. Like, I've reached a point now in SOD where I'm not really leveling any more characters before phase 2. I'm kind of taking a step back from it and really just doing our BFD raids twice a week. So why am I not spending all the rest of that time in Dragonflight? And I have logged in a few times. I still pop into retail, modern WoW, whatever you want to call it, probably once or twice a week. But I mostly just find myself ending up doing mount farming. I've kind of found it very difficult to motivate myself to really catch up with any of the content that's available at max level in Dragonflight. Now, quick note before I really dive into this topic, I just want to acknowledge that a lot of what I'm about to talk about is literally things that I don't know what I'm talking about. That's kind of the point. This is more about my experience as someone coming back to the game and trying to understand what's going on around me than it is necessarily directly about the systems and content that's there itself. And my experience logging into Veldraken has been that I just get overwhelmed immediately with everything that's going on around me. Like, I log in and I look at my minimap, and there are 3 of the shield quests that are supposed to mean this is like the important thing that you should do next. There are 3 of those that are relatively near my character standing in Veldraken, and also 2 that I've already picked up from somewhere. I don't know if it was a recent thing that I picked them up or if it was something that's left over from release still that's just sitting there. There's essentially 5 quests that are all telling me this is the next thing you should do. And not to mention, there's a good 7 or 8 other quests just around the fountain thing in the middle of Veldraken, and a couple others that are right next to that as well. And I don't know if any of those are important or not. I look at them and it seems like they need something, but I don't know if this is something that leads to some unlockable that I need to get in order to do something else, or if this is just flavor text, or this is just leftover quests from when I was leveling that I never got around to. It's just kind of a lot as a returning player to log in and have what feels like 12 different people all pulling me in a different direction, telling me this is an important thing that you need to go and do. And obviously, I know a lot of that is not actually that important. Some of those aren't going to be important, but it's hard for me to identify which ones that is just by looking at what's going on. And to be clear, this makes perfect sense as well. Like I said, I haven't really played Dragonflight since release, so they've added a bunch of stuff since then. It's very likely that there's just a lot of content that I never got around to that people who have been playing constantly since release have already done and already finished. And for them, it would have been an experience of like, oh, there's one new quest that I need to go and do instead of me logging in and seeing like 8 of them. But again, the focus here is about what my experience has been like as a returning player trying to get back into the game. And it's super interesting to me to go through this whole exercise because having spent so much time as a community manager working at Blizzard and really trying to think about like, okay, what is the experience as a returning player? What is it that people who come back to the game need to know? It's kind of cool to be on the other side of that coin for a minute and being able to actually directly recognize like, oh, these are the friction points that I'm now running into that are making it difficult for me to get back into the game. And I am definitely the sort of player that will become paralyzed by choice in a sense. Like when the game throws 6 or 7 different options at me for things that I should be doing and can be working on, and I get all of them at the same time, I find it difficult to prioritize which one I should be doing next. And I end up just kind of going, I don't know what to do here, so I'm not going to do any of it. And I know that's not a super logical response. That's just kind of where I end up. And it's not even really like oh, I'm upset or I'm angry or oh, what's going on? I'm too confused. I can't understand it. Close the game, log out, never come back. It's more that I will log in, and when I'm trying to pick something to do, like I know one option, which is to go farm mounts. And that's something that I want to be doing in Dragonflight. So that's a thing that I know that I can do. I know where to go to do it. And that's an easy, straightforward option for me. So then I'll look at all this other stuff and I'll be like, oh yeah, I'll do that some other time. Right now, I just kind of feel like chilling. So I'm just going to go do Ulduar or something for a Mimiron's Head, or go run Tempest Keep trying to get Ashes of Alar, which I still don't freaking have after all these years. And those are such easy options for me to go do that instead, that I never get around to all the other stuff that I'm like, yeah, I'll get to it later. And the later never comes. But for a game that has spent so much effort into streamlining itself and making it more apparent, like what the next thing that you should be doing is, I found it kind of weird that when I log in and I sit down, I'm like, okay, I'm back. I'm going to play this game. I'm logging in on my monk. I'm going to see what's happening. I really can't tell what the thing I'm supposed to do is. And realistically, the answer is probably that I should do all of those things at some point. But even then, I still have to pick which one to do first. And I'm going to want to do whatever the most important one is first, and not like put myself in a weird position at the same time. And maybe probably not worry too much about going back to like an old part of the map that isn't used anymore because there's all this new stuff in 10.2 and so on. It's just a little bit weird. Also, just side note, while we're talking about confusing things, what's going on with this whole gear system, the whole like hero, champion, etc. thing? I came across that because Mike Shaftnit, who you might remember from the Legendary days, he and a bunch of others were running me through some Mythic Plus dungeons a couple months ago, and I kept getting gear that had like hero or champion or adventurer or something else on it, and had different upgrade levels and upgrade tiers to it, and they all took different currencies and stuff. And I was trying to understand this thing, and I was streaming at the time, and I was like, okay, chat room, and there, a couple hundred people were in the chat. I was like, somebody will be able to explain this to me. And the most helpful response that I got was someone who linked me to a spreadsheet that explained all of it. And I feel like when you need to be linked a spreadsheet to understand a system, it's probably a little bit too complicated. Now, that's not something that's really stopping me from playing. Like, I could easily sit down and figure that out and probably be fine with it. And most of the idiosyncrasies of it, the nuances of it, probably don't really matter that much. It was just something that struck me as like, why is this so complicated? Anyway, that aside, looking back and sort of self-reflecting on my experiences and recognizing the sort of like feelings that I'm having and emotions that I'm having and confusion that I'm having trying to get back into the game, I find it really interesting that a lot of the feedback that I'm seeing from people that I know have been keeping up with the game, friends who are still very active in the game, various content creators, influencers, and so on, a lot of them are saying that they don't feel like there's enough to do in Dragonflight right now. And that's something that stuck out to me as really interesting, given that when I log in, I feel like I have 40 things that I need to accomplish to even start playing the game. Now, there's a few reasons that could be, and I genuinely don't know enough about the situation because, again, the whole experience here is that I don't know what I'm doing. I genuinely don't know enough to know exactly what it is. A couple of theories I have, though. One, it might be the case that they've started to rely a little bit too much on like intro quests to unlock things, where it's like, oh, here's this new feature that we're adding and a short quest chain that will introduce you to this and the characters that are involved and so on. And while that's super cool when you have like one new thing to go do, it does end up creating this like backlog of unlockables, or could end up creating this like backlog of unlockables, where someone like me, who's coming back after a year, assuming that this is what's going on and that this is what they've been doing the whole time, me coming back after a while, I now have this whole ton of quests and like a few hours worth of questing just to unlock a few basic features. And again, I want to be clear, that's just a theory about what it might be, because I haven't been able to get through the stuff to figure out if that's what it is. It also makes me wonder a bit if maybe some of the things that are available to do in Dragonflight have stopped feeling like a thing to do for some players. Like, I know one point of feedback that the Great Vault has been getting for a long time is that it ends up being the focus a little bit too much. Like, when the best gear that you can get comes from the Great Vault, to the point where you end up just completing the highest level Mythic Plus that you can, not because you want the drops from that Mythic Plus, but because you want a higher item level drop from your Great Vault in a week. That makes those Mythic Plus runs feel less important. You're just doing them as a chore, not because it's something that you might actually get from that. I don't know, though. Again, that's mostly just a theory coming from the perspective of someone who is obviously has a ton of experience with World of Warcraft and just been away from the game for a year and feeling like the game is so much different than it was when I stopped playing it literally during the current expansion. And realistically, like I said at the start of all this, if it wasn't for SOD, I'd probably have figured all this stuff out at this point already. SOD is something that I've been enjoying a lot and I understand it. So I've been diving into SOD and spending a ton of my time there. If I didn't have SOD taking my attention away from Dragonflight, I would have figured all this stuff out in Dragonflight by now, and it would probably have been fine. It's just, I think, interesting, again, from that perspective, this is what has caused me to go towards SOD instead. And this isn't a permanent situation or anything either. I'm definitely coming back for the War Within. Probably going to end up coming back to Dragonflight sometime around the War Within pre-patch. That's usually a good time for people to come back into the game, is when the pre-patch happens and there's sort of those lead-in events. And you just kind of go, okay, I don't know what's going on in this whole Dragon Isles thing, and that's fine. I don't need to know what's going on over there, because here's this new problem, and we're going to start building up towards that. I'm going to get my character ready for the new expansion, and we'll go from there. That's sort of my fallback plan if I don't end up getting into Dragonflight before then. I am very curious about what that 10.2.6 pirate thing is still, so I'll be keeping an eye on that, and maybe that's something that I'll end up wanting to jump into. But for now, my plan is kind of just let Dragonflight ride it out. I'll poke at it here and there, see if I still feel confused when I try to log in. But otherwise, looking towards the War Within, especially because probably sometime in the next couple of months is when we're going to start seeing, based on their roadmap, some of the precursors and some of the introductions to things like the War Within Alpha. And I'll definitely be looking to learn as much about that as I can once that becomes a thing. But also, I really want to know what your thoughts are. Part of the motivation for me even making this video in the first place is in the hopes that someone in the comments is going to be like, all right, dummy, these are the 2 quests that you need to do, so now you can get back into things. I'll be like, oh, that's amazing. I'm going to go and understand Dragonflight now. But I'm curious about your perspectives as well. Does it feel like Dragonflight is just too many things to unlock? That's the feeling that I've been getting, but is that the feeling that you're getting? It feels to me like there's too many currencies. Is that a thing? Like, I actually really want to hear all of your thoughts on this, because that will help me understand better how I can get back into it. And in fact, as we're sort of starting to wrap up today's episode here, I actually want to ask you guys some questions this time. Normally, this is the part of the show where I'll be responding to questions that you guys ask me. This time around, I want to ask you some questions. A big one being, what other topics would you like to see me talking about here on the show? Obviously, getting back into Dragonflight and retail and understanding more about what's going on there is going to be a big priority for me over the next few months. But are there other topics about the way MMOs work, or about certain ideas inside the game, or features that maybe you'd like to see at some point or something? Are there topics about Classic and how Classic relates to modern game and so on? Any idea, throw them at the wall. I would love to hear more ideas about different topics that I could hit. Maybe ones that aren't even necessarily related to what is current in World of Warcraft, just generally interesting ideas that I can talk about. And also just how much content that isn't necessarily directly WoW related, but might still be of interest to someone who likes WoW, would you like to see? How far outside of that bound, like where is that boundary for you? I'm really curious about that. Because obviously, like, there's a lot of other games that I play, and a lot of them are still probably of interest to World of Warcraft players. I want to make sure this show is always like, if you play WoW or you're someone who did play WoW, it's interesting to you. That's kind of the core audience that I'm really trying to target this thing at. But I'm trying to figure out how far outside that sphere of just specifically World of Warcraft would you like me to go? For example, right now there's this huge controversy around Pal World that I certainly have opinions that I would like to be able to share about how that's all fitting together, and how apparently no one can use Google and learn that most of what they're talking about is false anyway, just by literally connecting like two dots. And then anyway, there's a topic that I would love to talk about at some point. I just don't know if that's appropriate for this show. So let me know what you think about the idea of talking about, on occasion, other games on this show, or if that's something that you would still be interested to see on the channel, but maybe not as part of Sounds Good Makes Sense. I also have a couple of minor Patreon updates, which, by the way, thank you so much, everyone who's signed up for the Patreon so far. It really helps a ton, and I really super appreciate it. If you're watching this and you're unfamiliar with the Patreon so far, you can check it out at patreon.com/Devilore. There's just a single tier there, keeping it really simple for now. It gets you some cool perks. Please do check it out. But as far as other perks that I might be adding, there's a couple things that I'm considering adding to the Patreon. One is the idea of just releasing Sounds Good Makes Sense just whenever I finish it to Patreon, which is usually sometime the night before it goes live on YouTube. There's some very important algorithm related reasons why I post Sound Good Makes Sense on YouTube at the time that I do. But I don't need to worry about the YouTube algorithm on Patreon if I'm posting it directly there for Patreons or patrons. So let me know if the idea of it coming up probably the night before it goes live on YouTube is of interest to you as a patron. I've also gotten a lot of requests over the years, and even some recently, to release an audio only version of the show. And that's something that's very difficult to do when all of the revenue for the show comes through YouTube, essentially. Like if I were to put this out on just like Spotify or something, I basically make no money off of that. And I do need to make money to support myself. But I don't have to worry about that on Patreon, where the people that are there are already people that are supporting me. So the idea of releasing an audio only formatted version of it onto Patreon, I believe it has a way that you can listen to it like a podcast, maybe through their app. I need to look into that a little bit more, or if you have experience with something like that, please let me know. But that's another idea. Maybe I could release for patrons an audio only version of the podcast that you can listen to while you're on your commute or whatever. Anyway, I'm going to wrap it up there for today. Thank you guys so much once again for all of the support and for being here and watching. Again, any comments that you leave definitely help. Liking, subscribing the video, that's always going to be stuff that super helps just for algorithm purposes. Again, like I said, we always must praise the old algorithm by clicking those buttons. But I'm going to wrap it up here. Thanks again so much, everyone. I'll see you next time.